All right, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'll be your host today. Well, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell are back in the news. The prosecutors made a motion to join their cases together so that they can be tried in one matter. That will certainly going to be objected to by the defense, we would anticipate. And we want to show you a clip of the first hearing where Vallow's former friend, Melanie Gibb, testified. Let's take a listen.
What was the nature of that conversation?
He said, "Hi, Melanie, this is Chad. The Rexburg police are going to call you. Don't pick up." He said, oh, okay.
Where did the conversation go from there?
He let me know that the police were over at Lori Vallow's home in Rexburg and that they were inquiring about where JJ was. And that she was going to tell the police that JJ was with me.
Okay, how did you respond?
In shock, and I can't recall if I said anything at that moment. Oh, I did say, after the shock, I said, JJ's not at Kay's house.
And how did Mr. Daybell respond to that?
He said no.
Okay. Was there any other content to that conversation?
I asked him if he was nervous, and he said yes.
Okay. That same day, November 26, 2019, did you have any contact with Lori Vallow?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember approximately where you were when you heard from Lori Vallow?
Yes, I was in the same place.
Okay, and where was that again?
That was in Utah, in David's home.
And approximately what time did you hear from Defendant Vallow, Lori Vallow?
I possibly within an hour or two. I can't exactly recall.
Okay. And when you say an hour or two, what is that in reference to?
Her calling me, Lori calling me.
Right. Was it an hour or two after what?
I'm sorry, Chad's phone call.
Okay. What was the nature of that conversation?
When I picked up, she said, "Hi, Melanie, this is," well, she probably didn't say her name, but she said, "Just want to let you know everything's fine." She was upbeat, cheery, acting like nothing was wrong.
What happened after that?
She told me that the police had been there asking for JJ, and that she told the police that I had JJ, that I was at a movie called Frozen, that she asked me just to pick up my phone and take a random picture of kids running around, and that she would come by and pick him up, and then, that after me driving home from Utah to Arizona, that she would come and get him later that week.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there, Ms. Gibb. I want to point you back to this conversation or the statement about picking up your phone.
Mm-hmm.
What did she ask you to do with that again?
Take a picture of random kids to make it look like it was JJ.
All right, let's get to Imran Ansari, who is a criminal defense attorney, a former assistant district attorney, and a civil litigator currently in New York, and Julie Rendelman, a former ADA as well, a criminal defense attorney, and another New York attorney. So it's great to have you guys on the show. Guys, we were talking about this a little bit off camera. This is a motion to consolidate these cases, to have both of the defendants charged together. I should note, they are charged with conspiracy for the destruction and tampering with evidence, but not the murder itself. Julie, what are your feelings about the likelihood of the success in getting both of these defendants tried in one trial?
Oh, I think they're going to have no issue with keeping them together. I'm sure the defense is going to have an objection. One of the concerns they're going to have is that statements that are made from the co-defendant are going to be potentially used against their own client. And so there's always concerns about that. I think at the end of the day, considering how many witnesses are going to be needed, a lot of times the judges will view these joinder cases and make a determination, well, is it easier to basically try these cases together? Is it more appropriate for one jury to hear this versus having two separate trials at two separate dates? I think there's no question that the majority of the evidence, the majority of the witnesses are all the same, and there's no reason for them to be tried separately, especially when this is a conspiracy where both are involved.
Imran, I agree with what Julie says will be the argument by the prosecution with respect to that, but tactically speaking, the defense wants separate trials. They want the second lawyer, especially, it's going to be trying the case, wants to have the benefit of all the transcripts and testimony before. So they are going to make an argument, in my opinion, and Julie alluded to this, that there are statements that are going to be introduced and they can't cross-examine the statements, and that there may be evidence that would be admissible to one and not another one, and that would lead to undue confusion with the jury. What are your thoughts about all this?
Absolutely. I think we could expect that the defense attorneys for both of these defendants are going to be seeking severance of the trial, and they'll be opposing this motion by the prosecution. Now, whenever you have two defendants being tried at the same time, there's always a risk that there's going to be evidence that's going to be prejudicial to one of those defendants. Of course, the attorney for that defendant is going to do anything possible in order to seek a severance of the trial so that their client can have a fair trial. So I think we can expect that these attorneys are going to be seeking severance of these trials, opposing this motion by the prosecution to have one single trial in order to avoid any prejudicial evidence that may be coming out as to one defendant as opposed to the other.
Hey, Julie, just a tactical question. We always love to talk about our war stories. On the defense side, we had a case not too long ago where on this very issue of statements being introduced and some evidence that would be admissible to one and not the other one, and that could prejudice the defendant, the judge ruled in our favor, severed the trial. They went to the appellate division, the government, and they lost, and it led to a dismissal of the case against my client.
Is there a question? No, that's
yeah. I mean, the point is, it's a tactical question.
Sure,
it's a tactical question.
Look, we've had many cases where we had to do two jury trials at the same time. So that way we had all the witnesses testifying at the same time. When there was any specific witness that was only against one particular defendant, one of the juries, the 12, went out, and that one jury that remained heard the evidence against that one specific defendant. And that's another way to handle it, particularly when you have what's called a Bruton problem, which is where there's potential statements made by one defendant against the other.
Right, Bruton's what we're talking about. That's really fascinating to me. Were there people that were in both courtrooms to communicate what was happening in the other courtroom? Because we know witnesses never testify exactly the same, and different lawyers ask different questions. Could there have been a possibility at any point in time that information in one trial gets the lawyers find out about it in another trial, and that creates legal issues there? You
mean for a double jury?
Yeah, when you have a double jury. I've never heard that done that way.
So we did them all the time in New York. So especially with you, if you had, homicides where you had multiple, sometimes two, sometimes three, we actually had a 3-jury trial once. And so we just needed a really big courtroom. And so basically all the jurors would be in the courtroom. Someone would even sit behind us. They would hear the evidence. There was no issues because no jurors were allowed to even communicate with the other jurors. And the witnesses only testified once. There was one time when a witness had to testify again, because again, it gets a little complicated because that witness had to testify to one particular piece of information that only related to one defendant. So it gets a little complicated. It's usually up to the prosecutor, which was me at the time, to keep it organized and to keep all the evidence, because you have to have evidence for each specific jury.
Imran, did Julie just give the defense in this case an argument to make about how this should be done? It should be severed, but for witness convenience, and there's no reason why they can't do it like Julie Rendelman did it in New York?
Yeah, the Julie Rendelman defense.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I come from the same hallowed halls of the Kings County DA's office, more colloquial, better known as the Brooklyn DA's office, where Julie Rendelman was a legend in the Homicide Bureau. So whatever the Julie Rendelman defense is, it's going to be a good one. But yes, I think that's one of the options that the defense could propose if the judge is considering, for sake of judicial economy, different ways that the jury could hear evidence ways where the jury, in considering charges against one defendant, if it is a dual jury case, would deliberate separately, and it would be a way which would reduce any chance of prejudice against one client. Of course, if you are a defense attorney, you want the trial to go in a manner where your client is not prejudiced and they get a fair trial. But these sort of trials also lay a lot of groundwork and possibility for appellate issues. So it has to be done right.
Right, absolutely. And prosecutors need to make sure that they don't overstep, get a conviction, have it reversed, was something that drive me crazy as when I was the head of the agency. Well, let's switch gears here to St. Louis police officer Tamaris Bohannon, I believe is his name. He's 29 years old. He was shot and killed having responded on a call of a shooting. The defendant is Thomas Kinworthy. This is in St. Louis. And I just want to note a couple of facts here. In St. Louis, there have been 8 officers that have been shot and killed since June of 2020. And so let's just talk to you guys about, obviously a huge tragedy. Police officer responding to a scene. He was shot in the head. I'm curious, guys. We have this debate going on in the country, pro-police, anti-police, and it's getting more and more stark. How much do you believe, Julie, that these very animated folks on each side, and I mean very intensely animated, are not going to be able to do the job they need to do when they get on the jury and base it just on the law and the facts that they just may be anti-cops or pro-cops, and that's going to greatly influence the outcome of the case?
Well, it's the job of the defense attorney, the judge, and the prosecutor to interview each, particularly if you're able to, some judges are limiting, to make sure that, you're allowed to have opinions. You're allowed to not like cops. You're allowed to not like individuals with criminal records if it's that scenario. The issue is whether or not you can separate that feeling, that opinion, from making a decision in the specific case. And I do want to note something. It's funny, we talk about pro-cop, anti-cop. Nobody should be, no matter what your position is about what has happened in terms of violence by police on Black individuals and the taking of lives, no one should be accepting of the idea of a police officer being shot and killed. So I think, there is some room for everyone to meet in the middle and understand that none of this behavior is acceptable and none of this should be tolerated.
Yeah, Imran, but we know that Julie's point is very logical. But the fact of the matter is there are people out there that don't have a problem with this. They look at it as some sort of retributive justice, if they will. So I'm interested in what your thoughts are about that. And of course, talk to our audience a little bit about how the judges go about voir dire in order to try to ferret that out.
Sure. So during the voir dire process, which is jury selection, if you're on the prosecution, let's say, you're going to want to make sure that you weed out any potential jurors who are going to have a negative view of law enforcement just from the get-go. And you're going to voir dire, you're going to make sure that you hit certain points that, although you hear about in the news, that certain law enforcement police officers may have done wrong. You can't judge every officer the same way, and you have to get them to concede that there's good and bad in any profession. Mm-hmm. So it's a concern in jury selection, and I think now the country is more polarized than ever on this issue. With police brutality and Black Lives Matter, for now in this particular time frame in this country, it's a real issue. And if you're in jury selection, you're going to really want to make sure that you sort of weed out any potential jurors who have such strong opinions that they can't be fair and impartial on that jury. Right,
and that's to Julie's point before. The judge will ask, despite your feelings one way or the other, can you be fair? Can you be impartial? Can you evaluate the evidence in this case? I'm just curious. I want to ask each of you, do you guys use jury consultants when you're picking a jury? And if not, would you consider doing it now with everything that's going on? Julie?
I'm not a fan of jury consultants. I don't truly believe in them. I don't believe that they're that effective. I think that I'm betting Imran has maybe a different opinion than I do. I think that, a lot of times you are the best person to make a determination as to who the right jury is and why, because you're from that community. You also know kind of the layout of your case specifically. And I think that sometimes my gut in terms of who I'm most comfortable with and who I think is comfortable with me comes from me and not a jury consultant. But Imran may feel differently.
Yeah, Imran, to her point, I do the same thing. I feel my gut, there's a lot of connection. I feel like I can connect with this juror, and that science can't necessarily figure that out. What are your thoughts about all that?
Well, there's sometimes where the client insists on a jury consultant being part of the team during the jury selection process. And it's always a give and take when you have a jury consultant, because the client is looking at you as the attorney to select a jury that they feel is going to be fair and impartial or favorable to them. But they're also going to be listening to this jury consultant. And it sometimes leads to maybe too many cooks in the kitchen, because as you both know, as trial attorneys, you want to try your case the way you see fit. But there are certain circumstances, certain clients who just insist that a jury consultant be brought on board for that process.
Yeah, I think you just brought out another point that we have to defer to the client so long as it's ethical. And a lot of times we may think and see things strategically one way and a client sees another way. And it's our responsibility to do what the client wants so long as within the rules of the ethics ruling. So, guys, thank you very much for that great commentary. We have a lot more on the plate today. Stay with us. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Law&Crime Report. I'm your host, Bob Bianchi. LA, a tense area where there's been intense standoffs and battle lines between protesters and police. There have, by the estimations from the articles I'm reading, been hundreds of complaints against police officers, including 55 of excessive force. There have been several lawsuits filed, but there's one case that's taken a turn different than the rest of them. That is that the LAPD internal affairs folks turned over, they were doing an investigation of 10 police officers with regard to a curfew violation. That's what was imposed in order to stop these the violence that was going on. Apparently smashed a window, and somehow it wound up being investigated. 4 of those officers have been referred to the district attorney's office. Julie, we all know that when internal affairs is doing something, they can do 2 things essentially. One is find out if there's a rule or policy infraction and institute, some sort of punishment internally, or if they feel that there's an issue of criminality, they then send it to the district attorney's office. There could be no other way than to interpret that as what is occurring with these 4 officers. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, look, they've been investigating quite a few, and the fact that it's just these 4, it's interesting. Obviously, we don't know the full details of their investigation, but as you said, there's no question if they're sending it to the district attorney's office for the district attorney's office review, one can only assume that these 4 are being viewed potentially for criminal charges, whether they're misdemeanors, whether they're felonies. Obviously, we don't know, and there's obviously we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, Imran, I don't know in New York, but I'm curious in Jersey, certainly. We have this weird thing where you can still continue to investigate a police officer. But this is a big issue with the criminal justice reform stuff from the internal affairs perspective, so long as you issue garrity warnings. That was actually a case that came out of the state of New Jersey, but ultimately went to the United States Supreme Court. And essentially, garrity says when you get garrity warnings, you must comply, or it's an act of misconduct, with the investigation internally and not have to wait for the criminal case to completely unwind. And any statement you give in the internal affairs investigation under garrity cannot be used against the officer in a criminal case. So when you're representing these kind of folks, though, it's tricky. You don't want your cops to be speaking. You want them to basically enjoy the right to remain silent. But in some instances, they're forced to. What do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, I think, all investigative bodies, and we were touching upon the sort of polarization in the country right now with law enforcement and interactions with citizens. I think all investigative bodies that investigate police misconduct or allegations of that are being particularly careful because they're under the public eye, right? So these things are happening, and they're taking particular care to investigate it. They're referring things to prosecutor's office, DA's office, and other agencies that have some sort of oversight over police misconduct or allegations thereof. So, and there's a certain less of a due process right when it is an agency or investigative body looking at an employee. So where you have, like, say, IAB here in New York City, looking at the conduct of an officer in the ranks of the NYPD, those officers give up some of the due process rights that they may have, let's say, if it was a criminal charge, because it's essentially their employer looking into some allegations of misconduct on the job. So that's, you know, there's always that fine line between a criminal charge and then also some I guess remand or discipline, I should say, within the law enforcement body.
Yeah, actually, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about for many years is the body cam issue. And I confronted this when I was prosecutor. There's allegations here that some of these officers were told to take their body cams off. Some body cams didn't work, and there's been a lot of flurry of activity as to why. Now, the officers indicate some of those body cams didn't work because they had a 12-hour battery life, and those officers, you know, it just expired. And other ones are indicating that they weren't allowed to go replace those batteries or replace the cameras because of what they were confronting at that particular time. So even though that may be a violation of policy, there will be exceptions made in circumstances like that if believed. But then again, just to be fair, there have been times that we've seen, and I'm curious about your guys' experience, where those body cams seem to go off always at the wrong time. And sometimes it is done for the wrong reasons. Julie, what do you think's going on here from what you've read?
Yeah, you know, and again, each instance is its own set of facts, and so each one would have to be investigated separately. Obviously, there's going to be a situation where you have someone who has a body cam on, it's been 12 hours, the battery's expired, and they can't leave where they are because they're dealing with an emergency. That's a little different than a scenario where someone is told to shut off, or someone chooses to shut off the body cam right at the moment where something happens that, you know, that raises some issues about a police officer's conduct. One of the things I've been noticing, and, you know, I hate, you know, I see both sides. I was a prosecutor. I had fantastic experience with police officers. I also had a horrible experience with police officers. They are human like everybody else. But one of the things I did notice lately with some of my cases is that I'm noticing that the body cam is coming on later and later. And so when you see a confrontation with the police officers with a client and you don't hear or see anything until much later into the confrontation, there are some concerns that they're choosing to wait a lengthier period of time in order to show what's going on. That's troubling to me because obviously the point of the body cam is for you to see what's going on.
Yeah, now, Imran, at least in my experience so far, those body cams have, and motor vehicle recordings, the MVRs, have actually been very helpful to the police when they've had complaints lodged against them. But to Julie's point, there is no question about the fact that, and like she said, there's great officers, a majority of them are, but there are some that don't do the right thing. We all know that. Has it been your experience that you've seen the same thing Julie is seeing and that I'm seeing, that sometimes they either get turned off, or if it's in the car, the camera gets pointed in a different direction? What do you think?
Yeah, no, and also just to piggyback on what Julie said, I think each scenario is its own scenario, right? So you have times where the camera may come on later, and I think it does serve, if you're a defense attorney from the defense side, if that camera comes on later or is pointed at a different direction and it's conveniently perhaps not capturing the moment which is in question, I think that the jury could really take a negative inference from that, and the prosecution would take a hit based on that. But you know, it's a new age, a new era in law enforcement, right? Where things are being captured not only by body cams on the officers themselves, but also by bystanders on their phones. So it's really it's the video age of law enforcement, and I think it could, depending on the circumstances, help either the prosecution or defense, again, depending on the circumstances and the facts of those particular incidents.
Yeah, you know, and that's a great point you're talking about with the public that's out there, and that's why it's crazy to me to be shutting things off if you're doing the right thing, because there's people that have got video all over, so it's a matter of time till it surfaces. But you know, I always found it interesting too when they started mandating that confessions be recorded. When it got to the Miranda piece, for the first 10 years of my career, or 7 years of my career as an assistant prosecutor, before the videotaping was done, nobody ever had a question about Miranda. It was always like, I read the Miranda rights. They voluntarily waived the rights. They had no questions. And then for some miraculously crazy reason, maybe it was in the air, once they started recording those confessions, virtually everyone had what they called an equivocating response. Like, I really don't know. What do you think I should do? And then the cops have to actually navigate that, and their lawyers help them navigate that. But I don't know. Is it me, or did maybe the camera produce a different kind of recording, create defendants to be more equivocating?
I'll respond by saying one guesses that it's more the fact that the officers weren't necessarily being completely forthright about the responses. I do want to go back to one thing that kind of Imran covered and you covered is, it's not just the police that are putting on their cameras and shutting off their cameras. It's also people watching crime. So if you remember, we've seen a lot of videotapes where pieces are cut off. And so when we see only a piece of a video of an interaction, whether it be with a police officer, with a pedestrian, or with a pedestrian with another person, if you're only taking a piece of it, keep in mind that that's also something that's going to impact what the real narrative is. We've seen that plenty of times where all of a sudden a new video comes out that shows that the video that an individual took on the street was not completely accurate either. So I want to make sure we understand that it comes from every side.
Yeah, and that Julie, that is such a great point, and it is so infuriating in some of the cases we've recently been covering that it shows the latter part of the conduct, but not showing what was occurring beforehand that led to that conduct. And I think people have been hurt by that, both from an informational point of view, and of course, the most salacious thing gets out there, but not the pretext of it. That is so important, and a court would never allow a piece of the video. They'd allow the entire encounter to come out. Hey guys, thanks for that commentary. When we come back, we're going to be talking about 3 transgender women who were brutally attacked in Los Angeles. Take a break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'm your host. So 3 transgender people were beaten up by 2 defendants in a really, really sick and heinous kind of way. 2 people have been arrested, Carlton Calloway and Dabyell, I believe it is, Williams. This is in LA and Hollywood in August of 2020. They're charged with 6 counts of robbery, assault, grand theft. They would befriend the victims before attacking them. The assaults were live streamed and placed on social media platforms. And in the videos, you can hear people mocking the attacks and yelling at them slurs at these transgender folks. One of whom says a crowbar was put to his face. He was robbed, forced to hold hands with one of the defendants so that he could go and attack other transgender people. Mr. Calloway is looking at 13 years and 4 months in state prison, and Mr. Williams, 8 years and 4 months in state prison for these charges. Julie, what goes on? Clearly a hate crime. These people are being preyed upon by certain folks. And as a prosecutor, how do you think prosecutors view this kind of offense now, as opposed to, say, 20 years ago?
There's been a lot of changes from many years ago, particularly in New York City, I think, where, it's become at least progressive in terms of the LGBTQ community. And I think what's troubling about the aspects of this case is not just the fact that an individual is being chosen because of being a transgender woman, but the fact that the taping of it is what always seems to bring it to that level. We talk about, how this is the world of, social media, the world of social media bullying. And then we see that, a crime, it's not bad enough that a crime is committed, but the crime is committed so that the world can see it in almost an entertaining format. And so, video can be used for a lot of good, and it's been used for a lot of good in the past, several months. It can be used for a lot of hate and a lot of vicious crimes. And this is one of them. And that's what makes it all the worse.
Well, Julie, you're prescient. Let's take a look at some of this video.
Oh, this thing got the money. Whoa! Whoa! Damn! Damn! What the fuck? Oh, shit. Yeah, I think it's time to leave, nigga. I didn't get that. I didn't get that. Hey! She's dead, nigga. Get her again. Damn. R.I.P. What the fuck? That's her, that nigga. What the fuck, bro? Yeah, let's call 911. Call the cops. Oh my God, call the police. Call the
Yeah, they called him already.
Imran, I mean, it's just it's a horrible thing to look at. And then, you know, we were just talking about this off camera. It's bad enough, the assault. It's a horrible, life-altering, post-traumatic stress disorder kind of thing. But now it's throughout the entire world. It's recorded, and they can never get away from it. In fact, I'm shocked. Maybe it'll get pulled. But this is the kind of stuff that causes problems. This is the kind of stuff that desensitizes people to hatred. What do you think?
No, absolutely. I think, and we see this problem happening over and over again in the internet age. And again, you know, we were talking about how people are using their phones to videotape police encounters, but we see real ugly incidents like this where people are using their phone to record crimes. And now, you know, in many ways for a prosecutor, that's great because now you're going to have evidence of crimes, you're going to have witnesses and things documented. But just on a human standpoint, it's horrible because they say what the internet never forgets, right? So these things may linger on the internet. These victims of these crimes may have to relive it over and over again. People may post this repeatedly. People may, you know, put this on social media on it over and over again. So the court of law may, you know, these people may experience justice in the court of law. But these things may live on, and like you said, post-traumatic stress disorder, it may be something that's really going to hurt them for a long time because, as some people say, the internet doesn't forget.
Yeah, that's a great slogan. Julie, let's go back to your point a little bit about how things have changed over the 20 years. Talk to us generally speaking, and I know that each law has different kinds of wording, but what a hate crime is and how much that has changed the landscape with respect to additional powerful charges that prosecutors can file. And secondly, Julie, I'm wondering if you could talk about whether you think the feds can get involved in this for some sort of civil rights violation.
Sure. And, you know, again, you have to distinguish in this specific case, just so we're clear, the actions of the defendants that were actually robbing these victims and the actions of those individuals who are filming and making comments, because a defendant can commit a crime, he can commit a robbery. It doesn't make it a hate crime simply because the individual that he's committing the crime against is transgender or elderly. There has to be something about the crime, whether it be that he specifically targeted these individuals because they were more vulnerable, i.e. if someone's elderly, or because of some type of hate towards any type of individual, whether it be someone, you know, from a different race, someone from, you know, in the transgender community. So you have to separate the two and make sure that you have to be able to prove that the conduct itself was based on hate. You had another question. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, what do you think about the feds' involvement in this? Do you think they get involved?
Yeah, they may. I'm not sure that this is the type of, it depends. You know, one of the things that we may find out is that these specific defendants have been doing this for a period of time, and this might elevate it to, you know, some type of federal crime. Again, we don't know enough, particularly about, you know, the specifics in terms of these specific cases. In terms of, I had trouble hearing some of the comments that were made. I know that there were some inappropriate comments made. I couldn't tell who it was coming from. So I think that obviously there's going to be more facts that need to be revealed. I do want to make one comment, and that is that, you know, keep in mind, you know, Imran's right. These videos help the prosecutor because now we see the actual crime. And the thing that distinguishes these individuals that are filming acts from those who just film because they're actually trying to help the victim and trying to get the individual caught is they find it so humorous that this crime is happening. In fact, you hear one of them yell, hit her again, hit her again. And so let's remember, it's okay. I don't have trouble with videoing if you're doing it for the purpose of helping, but not if you're doing it for the purpose of, you know, enjoying and entertaining the actual crime that's happening.
Well, yeah, and then posting it on social media certainly wasn't done for the benefit of the victims of this case. Imran, I'm curious, do you believe that laws should be passed that say that individuals in those circumstances, the people videotaping, have an affirmative obligation to try to assist?
Oh, you know, I think that's where you're crossing the line, I guess, between criminal culpability and then civil liability. So is there a question of negligence on these individuals? Do they have an affirmative duty to step in, intervene, and assist these individuals? Well, you know, the law of negligence has been pretty clear on the civil side about that if you do that, then you're assuming the risk, right? You're assuming that duty. And if things go awry, then you may be facing some negligence, liability there. So whether laws should be passed that make it a crime to not intervene, I think it's going to that may be going a little too far. I think on a human standpoint, you're like, come on, this person is getting hurt, and you're doing the most ugly act possible, and you're recording it and getting a laugh out of it. But whether we criminalize not intervening, I think a lot of thought would have to go into that by the legislature, by the lawmakers. Otherwise, it may lead to maybe a little over-application of the law, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, it may also lead to individuals being injured in that process. Guys, excellent commentary. Did you guys know that Black Wall Street Massacre in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma? Now there's a lawsuit filed by a 105-year-old person. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with that story. Well, welcome back. I'm your host, Bob Bianchi. Yes, in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Black Wall Street Massacre. Let me give you guys some facts as we've been able to glean them. This was part of the HBO show Watchmen. This was a 2-day, quote, reign of terror, end quote, where there was bloodshed, the business destroyed. It was a very, very successful Black entrepreneurial community. Laws were thereafter passed, according to individuals who filed a recent civil complaint, that depressed their ability to be able to own businesses and make money. And we have one of the plaintiffs is 100 lead plaintiffs, 105-year-old plaintiff Lassie Benningfield. She is looking for $50 to $100 million and reconstruction of the Greenwood district. And they did it under the grounds of public nuisance and unjust enrichment. That is the stolen property, the lives lost, and the pain and suffering, to name a few of the things in the cause of action. Julie, very, very interesting case. Just take it away. What do you think about the efficacy of this kind of lawsuit? This isn't just reparations for non-direct things. These are from descendants, some of them, and others who claim that this led to a cascading set of events that exist to this day. Good lawsuit or not?
So I'm not the civil guru. I think Imran is. I think it's important to be talking about this because we're never to forget those horrible events that happened. I'm not confident that the civil aspect is going to hold water. I mean, we've seen a lot of this when it came to reparations and the return of stolen property when it came to what occurred in Germany with the victims of the Holocaust. And there were some, serious issues in terms of the success of those, just because of the property being, handed down from generations to generations and how to link them to the original owners of that property. I think there's a separate issue which talks about, the permanency of how those events impacted what is happening today. That's a separate issue that I think is actually at least interesting in terms of talking about it. I'm not so sure that it's going to be successful at the end, though.
Okay, so Imran, I wanted to go to you last because I know you do some civil stuff. Do a lot of civil stuff. So, what do you think of the suit? Are there any statute of limitations issues in your mind? And do you think that there's any level of credibility to it, to the extent that a court will not dismiss it prior to going to trial on summary judgment?
So when I first heard about this lawsuit, I mean, immediately what comes to mind is the question that you raised of statute of limitations. We're dealing with a horrific incident. And, if anything, and I think this may be one motivation, is put this incident in the spotlight again. So when I read this article, I actually went back and I did some research just because I was fascinated by how a horrific sort of pogrom against that community could have occurred. So if anything, let's just say there's a statute of limitations argument in order to get this suit dismissed before an answer. And that's successful. Well, in terms of the lawsuit of unjust enrichment, public nuisance, and those causes of action being dismissed, that would be unfortunate. But if anything, this is bringing this incident, which may have been forgotten by a lot of people in this country, in the spotlight. So whether it's an actual monetary reparation or at least bringing this into the spotlight again, getting this historic and tragic incident before, let's say, the next generation of Americans, well, maybe that's going to be successful if the lawsuit isn't successful itself.
Yeah, Julie, I mean, it's a great point. I mean, some people do file these lawsuits because they're trying to make a point. There were a lot of attachments, I'm told, to the complaint that did what Imran is saying as far as showing everybody what happened here. So it's kind of a win-win so long as they don't get hit with sanctions for filing a frivolous complaint, which I can't in a million years imagine a judge would do under these circumstances, for sure. So it's almost as if that is in fact the philosophy, and I believe it is, they've almost already won just by the filing.
I agree. I mean, we're supposed, I think the fact that Imran spent the time to look this up because he wasn't as familiar with it tells you a lot, because I think a lot of people are doing that because I think a lot of people didn't even know about it. And the fact that this is the time for us to be reflecting on not just what's happening today, but what happened in the past and how that impacts what happens today. And so if it brings this to the forefront of what people are talking about, then you're right. It's been successful as it is.
Yeah, Imran, talk to us a little bit about the laws. Like one of the allegations in this complaint is that after they burned it down to the ground, they actually instituted laws that depressed their ability to be able to make a living. So they didn't just destroy it. They destroyed it with the intention, according to the allegations of this lawsuit, that it could never be rebuilt back the same again. Can you imagine how far we've come as far as our laws are concerned?
Yeah, and I think that's what maybe the argument will be on allowing this lawsuit to survive, because although the act itself occurred in the 1920s, the hurt, the damages, the ramifications have been carrying on to this present day. So maybe that will be the argument when you're talking about a statute of limitations thing, that the harm is continuing. Right. And that is a legal theory of continuing harm, which sometimes is successful in getting a statute of limitations sort of extended.
All right, Imran, listen, I know that when you're trying your civil cases, you would like nothing more than to get a guy out of jail who was serving a life sentence for a murder that they did not commit and receive an $8 million settlement for that. That may not be enough in some people's minds, but that's a good payday for him and for his attorneys for sure. But then they regrettably find out that they've been rearrested and are facing life in prison again. So this Missouri man, David Robinson, was previously in prison for almost 20 years when facing a life sentence, and if convicted for this domestic assault, could be right back in. Guys, Imran, what are you telling your client? You got out, you got him $8 million. What's going on?
I think, well, you're sort of putting your head down and shaking your head. And what do you tell your client? You spent all that time wrongfully convicted, incarcerated. You get a mega $8 million settlement, and then there's these allegations now against you that may land you back in the slammer. So it's almost like all that work for nothing, right? And all that time in jail. You have an opportunity now to go out there, and of course these are still just allegations. But then you're sort of shaking your head, saying, "How could you blow it this way?" And you're headed back to the slammer potentially.
Yeah, I mean, and Julie, at least, he's got, supposedly would have the money to afford quality legal representation in a case like this. And of course, we don't know all of the facts and circumstances, but talk to us a little bit about the escalation of domestic violence cases that is occurring. And from my practice point of view, ensnares people who are otherwise decent citizens, never had a problem before. And then their life is altered because, at least in my state, and I would imagine many others, this is taken very seriously as a crime.
Yeah, and of course, with this case, obviously, we don't know all the facts, but if they're true, we do know that there's surveillance video that actually shows this crime happening. I believe it happened in a liquor store. So it's going to be hard for him to have, obviously, by the way, one of the defenses may actually be that he, spent 20 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit. And so someone's going to be angry when they leave jail after 20 years. But with that said, yes, I think with the advent of what's happened with the pandemic, I certainly in my practice have seen an uptick in domestic violence cases. I mean, it's hard enough for a healthy relationship to be getting through these incredibly difficult times. You're stuck at home, the children are home. It's going to be even more difficult for those who have some, holes or, difficulties in the relationship, that these types of crimes are going to happen more frequently. There's going to be more alcohol involved potentially. Sometimes those who have drug issues, it's going to be difficult to remain off those drugs. So I think that there has to be some level, even for the prosecutor's office, to understand. Sorry.
I completely agree. Guys, listen, thank you so much for your commentary. It was awesome. You can stay tuned for our regularly scheduled program, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at @RBianchiESQ. Have a great holiday.